Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software engineer by developing yourself, your skills, your network, your habits, and more. I'm one of your co-hosts, Peter Elbaum, and today we're talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, that is super relevant and I hope going to be super helpful to you as you progress throughout your career, and that is how to negotiate a job offer as a software engineer. And so there are a few things that are specific to being a software engineer in a job negotiation, but there are also a lot of things that are common to any job offer and negotiating that offer. And so I wanted to share my thoughts on how you can best do this today. And so this audio is going to be from a YouTube video I made a little while back that has gotten pretty good feedback. And so my hope is that it maybe helps you get a little bit more informed and that it'll help you think a little bit about how you want to approach negotiations before you're actually there. And if you're in a boot camp or thinking about transitioning to tech, I hope that this video gives you a little bit more insight into what this particular part of the career is like. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so today we're talking about how to negotiate a software developer's salary. Negotiating your starting salary is extremely important and has probably the biggest impact on your future earnings, because your starting salary is the basis for all your future raises and compensation increases. There is a lot of earning potential in the tech industry, but the thing is, most people are bad at negotiating. And so today I wanted to talk about how to prepare for a salary negotiation and some tactics to help you in the negotiation. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first step for any salary negotiation is researching the market. And this can be done not only when you're getting close to a salary negotiation, but even before you start applying for jobs. If you know you're going to be on the market, it's really helpful to know what your local market is paying. One caveat here, I just said local market, but of course, remote work is much more of a thing than it was before the pandemic. So this still applies. You just want to research what are companies paying in your area. Sometimes they adjust salaries based on what part of the country or world you live in. And those are all important things to take into consideration when you're doing your research. So with that said, there are a lot of places you can go to get salary data. So if you're looking more at a big tech job, you can go to levels.fyi. This is a website that has compiled user-submitted salary data for all kinds of big tech companies, and you can search by level, compensation, by the company, by the location, and it's super helpful. So it gives you a sense of what is possible given what level of seniority you're going to be at, what company you're going to be at, where you live, and all those kind of things. There are also other resources like PayScale. I think Indeed does salaries, and there are also paid resources like ADP. The point is that there are places you can go on the internet, whether or not you're willing to pay, to start to compile some data and get a sense for what is possible. And that is the whole point of this stage of the research process, is just getting a broad idea of what is possible in your market. A few other things you can do as you're researching the market is, number one, talk to friends you have who might be developers in the market and get a sense for what they get paid. Of course, it can be a little bit awkward to ask somebody, hey, what do you make? But just try and get a sense from that person what they think is reasonable for the market, what they're seeing out there, what friends of theirs have been paid. And in doing that, you begin to get even more data points, which of course is the goal, and begin to refine your idea of what the possible ranges might be. Other things you can do are talk to local recruiters. So recruiters, of course, may or may not be completely honest with you, but if you just got in touch with somebody and said, hey, what are you seeing out there? Hey, I have 5 years of experience. What do you think I could reasonably make? You'll get some information, and whether or not it's completely accurate is a little bit beyond the point, but you just want, again, to know what is possible. Okay, so you've researched the market, you've kind of built your broad ranges for what you think reasonable possibilities are. Your next step is to research specific companies. And I'm going to assume here that you're maybe interviewing with some companies and you're getting down to those latter stages of when a negotiation might be coming up. You want to start putting in work before that to figure out what exactly you're going to ask for. And I think a good place to start here for researching specific company salary data is Glassdoor. Glassdoor allows you to post jobs and compensation, and I think it's pretty useful here. In addition to some of the resources we've already mentioned, I would go straight to Glassdoor and begin to kind of build out my model for what a reasonable starting salary ask would be. Another strategy you can take here if you're a little bit bold is use LinkedIn search feature and find past employees from the company and just ask them, hey, were they satisfied with their pay? Do they think the pay was competitive to the market? And if you're really courageous, ask them what they made, or ask them to give you a range of what they made. And in doing so, again, you're building your data, you're getting a sense for what reality is. And it takes a little bit of courage, a little bit of boldness, but I think if you take that extra step, you'll be much more prepared for the real deal. Okay, so you've researched the market and the company. Let's say you're now negotiating your offer. What are some strategies and tactics you can use to get the best possible outcome? I'm only going to talk about one of those today because there's been a lot written on this topic and a lot that's been said probably better than I could say it. And so I'll point you to my favorite resource on this topic, which is an article called 10 Rules for Negotiating a Job Offer. And that is from this guy, Hasib Qureshi, who initially got pretty popular in the development community because he wrote up this series of articles on how he landed a $250,000 junior level offer at Airbnb. And I highly recommend that series and this article. I'll link those below. And I think you just get a great sense from those articles of how to approach these kind of things. But there is one thing that Hasib mentions that is very commonplace, but I did want to touch on it, and that is don't say the first number. Now, this is extremely cliched advice, but it's cliche for a reason. And the reason is that whoever says the first number anchors the rest of the negotiation. And anchoring is this idea of it just sets the frame of reference for everything that is to come. And as the potential employee, you're unlikely to get an offer that is higher than the first number that you say. And so you just don't want to be in the position to say, mostly because there is an information imbalance. Hasib talks about this in the articles, but the companies know basically everything. They know what they're willing to pay. They know what they paid the last person that did this job. They know the maximum that they can pay a person to do this job. And you know none of that. You basically know nothing. And companies typically are trying to extract as much information from you as possible in order to give you maybe not the lowest offer possible, but definitely not the highest. And so you want to retain information. It's really the only thing you have that gives you any kind of leverage in a negotiation. And so I want to get really practical here. How do you avoid saying the first number? Because this comes up a lot, even sometimes in the first conversation with the recruiter, they'll just say very casually, and what are your salary expectations? And this happens so much that you've really got to be on the lookout for it and have kind of a stock line to say that will help you get out of this situation. And so what I normally say is, hey, you know what? I'm a reasonable person. I'm going to assume that you all are reasonable people. And so if we decide that we want to work together, I'm confident that we could come to an agreement that everybody could be happy with. And I actually took that sentence or kind of that formulation from another great salary negotiation article from Patio 11 that I'll also link below. But this kind of allows you to put it off. And so a lot of times they'll say something like, oh, but I need to fill out this form. If that's the case, you can say, we'll just put a 0 in so that we know to come back to it later. But essentially, the company is trying to de-risk the process for themselves, because the worst thing if you're the company is to get to the end stages of a negotiation or of a job search process and lose somebody because there's a mismatch in salary or because you can't close them. And so companies try to de-risk this process by trying to box you in and take away your negotiating power way before it's actually time to negotiate. And I actually have a story about this. So very quick story. My first job in development, I was in the kind of end stages of the job search process, and my future boss basically said something like, and how would you feel about working for $62,000 a year? Which I mentioned in my last video was my starting salary. And I said, that sounds good. And so I should have had red flags, but I was very green. I was new to the industry. And honestly, that was a lot more money than I had hoped to make. But the point there is when I said, sounds good, that's kind of implicitly already agreeing to work for that salary. And in fact, what ended up happening is that I tried to negotiate later, and my boss said this is a pre-negotiated offer, which is BS. Don't ever accept that. I ended up accepting that. But what was happening behind the scenes, I later realized, is that my boss was fairly image conscious and didn't want to go to his bosses and say, hey, I've got somebody that can do this job and present me to them unless he was absolutely certain that things would go through. And so again, it's that de-risking process that companies absolutely want to do. And usually the way that they de-risk it is by taking away your leverage. And so the ideal scenario would be a company comes to you, makes you an offer, and gives you that offer as the first number. But if stuff happens before then, you can say, I don't know, I'm flexible. Would you mind giving me a range for what you've paid the past people that have done this job? Anything you can do to avoid anchoring the conversation yourself, you want to do, because you may come in way lower than is possible. And at that point, the company's not going to say, oh, we paid a bunch of people way more money to do this job. They're going to say, okay, sounds good. And at the point at which they're giving you exactly what you asked for, the negotiation is over. You can't do anything at that point. So again, cliched advice, but you do not want to give the first number. So consider some strategies, some of the things I mentioned that might help you avoid doing so. That's all for today. Thanks so much for being with us. A few shameless plugs before you go. Parsity is at parsity.io. My YouTube channel is at youtube.com/Peter Elbaum. And our 30-day cohort-based JavaScript course is at dev30.xyz. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you soon.